Aristotle's Politics offers one of the most influential accounts of constitutional theory in all of history. Aristotle's a great philosopher about the nature of constitutions, and he's a great observer of the experiments in constitutionalism that had taken place across the Greek world in the classical period. And his Politics reflects on those experiences to outline a theory of constitutional justice. Aristotle's constitutional theory focuses on the forms and the functions of the Constitution. Aristotle says that there are three different forms of the Constitution. There are constitutions in which the rule is held by one, in which it's held by a few, in which it's held by the many. Rule by the individual is a kind of monarchy. Rule by the few is an aristocracy. And rule by the many is what Aristotle calls a polity. Aristotle says each of these forms also has a deviant version. That is, Aristotle says that there's a version of these in which the rule has gone wrong. And so rule by a single individual, when it's functioning appropriately, is a monarchy. But when it becomes deviant or incorrect, then it's a tyranny. Rule by the few is an aristocracy, unless it turns deviant, and then it's an oligarchy. Rule by the many is a polity, unless it turns deviant, and then, as we've noted, it's called a democracy, a word that has negative connotations. Now, for Aristotle, the difference turns on whether or not the rule is held in the interest of the common good. And so a king that rules for the common good is a true monarch, but one who rules for his own self-interest is a tyrant. Similarly, when a few rule for the common good, that's an aristocracy. But when a few rule for their own interest, that's an oligarchy. When the many rule for the common good, that's a polity. When they rule for their own interest, that's a democracy. Aristotle talks about the forms of the Constitution at length, and these are kind of ideal types. Aristotle recognizes that there are different forms, that even within the category of democracy, there are extreme and radical democracies, and there are more mixed democracies. He recognizes that there are three different elements of a constitution. There's what we would call the executive power, there's the legislative or deliberative power, and there's the judicial power. And so Aristotle has something that presages the kind of theory of the different kinds of powers within a constitution. And he recognizes that no constitution is pure, that there are different kinds of mixture that takes place within the constitutions. And so Aristotle says that these kinds of constitutions are differently suited to different kinds of societies. And Aristotle talks about the best form of the constitution. And it's in fact difficult to tell what Aristotle thinks is the best form of constitutional organization. In some places, he seems to think that the ideal form of a constitution would in fact be a monarchy, when one supremely virtuous individual ruled over the entire society for the common good. But in other places, Aristotle seems to say that the highest form of constitution is in fact an aristocracy. And I want us to think about what aristocracy means for Aristotle. Because as he recognizes, aristocracy can mean different things. In fact, he says there are three different ways to think about the criteria for what an aristocracy is. In Greek, aristocracy simply means rule by the best. Aristos is the best. And an aristocracy is rule by those who are best. Well, best on what grounds? Aristotle says that it might mean the best, those who are well-born. And when we hear aristocracy as Americans, that's the primary connotation. An aristocracy are those who are well-born. Aristotle says it could also mean simply those who are rich. And this too has some resonance with us, that the aristocracy is simply those who have money. And Aristotle in fact says that a true aristocracy is not ruled by those who are from a class of elite families or those who are simply wealthy, but those who are in fact the best, those who are the most virtuous. And this is why Aristotle is an aristocrat. He thinks that society should be ruled by those who are best, that those who deserve power, those who deserve rule, those who deserve office and honor, are those who are most worthy, those who have the highest degree of human excellence. And so for us, it might be better to think of aristocracy, when we read it in Aristotle's Politics, as meritocracy, a horrible English word that was coined in the mid-20th century that means rule by those who are deserving. Aristotle's version of aristocracy means rule by those who are most morally virtuous, because for Aristotle, those who are truly excellent are the ones that deserve rule in a political constitution.